Welcome, friends, to the 6th International Fortepiano Salon. My name is Yi-heng. I'm one of your hosts tonight and a director of the Academy of Fortepiano Performance, along with my co-host, Maria Rose, who is speaking to you, meeting us from upstate New York. Welcome to the 6th International Fortepiano Salon, entitled Why Cristofori Matters, with our special guest host, Andrew Willis. It's such a pleasure to have you with us again. As always, we want to feel your presence with us. So right now in the chat box on your Facebook or YouTube live streams, if you would like to, please say hello, what your name is, and where you're watching from tonight, and what you do in music. We'd love to hear from you. Today we have a wonderful and rich program with incredible musicians. And this is our 6th salon. We have had 5 salons before this of incredible variety and high quality performances. You can watch past salons by going to www.academyfortepiano.org and see the kind of programming that we've brought to you from amazing fortepiano music being made from around the world. Tonight, we wanted to especially take note as it is our last salon before we take a break before the summer. We do hope and anticipate resuming in the fall because these salons have been so enthusiastically received, and the sense of community and learning that has been fostered by all of you, by all that you've contributed, cannot be stopped. So I'm happy to tell you that next year we will continue in our salon season. What came out of a difficult pandemic is now something that hopefully is here to stay for the longer term. On that note, if you are in a position to support and give to fund the salons and help produce them, please consider donating via the Catskill Mountain Foundation, which is a nonprofit wonderful foundation, which is the umbrella organization of the Academy of Fortepiano Performance. And your donations will go directly to funding the salons, as well as to giving scholarships to wonderful students who come to our summer workshop at the Academy of Fortepiano Performance in Hunter, New York. So you will see the information on how to donate tonight appearing in your chat boxes, and please email us or ask us if you have any questions about that. I thank you in advance for your generosity and vision in joining us. Now I hand it over to my co-host, Maria Rose.
Thank you, Yi-heng, and welcome to everyone again from all over the world. I know there are even some very enthusiastic people in Europe who stay up until the wee hours of the night to watch us live, and we really appreciate your support. It's been a wonderful experience for all of us, and especially because everybody who's involved with fortepiano playing has suffered under the incredible burden of moving our pianos from one place to another. And this is one of the wonderful solutions that we can just play from our homes and share music without having to move the instruments, which is a huge benefit. So we have, as Yi-heng mentioned, a wonderful program today. And but before I introduce the program, I would like to let you know that we do have a live workshop this summer, as we have done in the previous years, not last year, but in the 3 years previous in Hunter, New York. And if you're in a position to come, we're going to send you all the information. There'll be concerts. It'll be a very small but very select group of wonderful performers, master performers, real master students who are really professionals themselves, who will be coming to Hunter and play on the pianos which are at the Piano Museum. And we will have probably 2 videographers on site, and we're going to make lots of videos of the performances and the activities which we hope to present to you in the first salon after the summer in September. And so in that way you'll be connected even if you can't come, but if you're in the neighborhood, please come to our concert live if we can. So now let's turn to the program for tonight. And it occurred to me as I was watching the credits that when we talk about fortepiano, we always talk about classical and early romantic piano music, which is played on fortepianos and sometimes extending into the early 20th century. But now a pretty recent movement has been to, among a lot of the fortepianists, to look backwards and to include Baroque fortepiano music, because the earliest pianos were built in the beginning of the 18th century. The first one was built around Cristofori, around 1700. And this is the repertoire that you heard in the opening and that we will be exploring and that Andrew Willis will tell you a lot more about. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Andrew Willis. He is, Andrew is one of the most versatile, both as a scholar and as a performer. He's an incredible virtuoso performer, but also a very serious scholar of the history of piano music. And he's going to take us to the world of the very early fortepiano. Welcome, Andrew.
Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Maria and Yi-heng. It's very exciting to be part of this wonderful series. And I thank you both for the invitation to take part. And I also want to recognize the wonderful people at the Catskill Mountain Foundation, Pam Weisberg, Joan Oldenow, and Sarah Taft, without whom we couldn't have done what we're going to do tonight. So I really appreciate this wonderful opportunity to get together with so many aficionados of early keyboard music. And as you say, to sort of turn the clock back even farther than we usually do to the very first age of the piano. I'll have a lot to say about Cristofori, but I think it's important to start with music. And so we'll have you listen to a two-movement sonata by Domenico Alberti, who was active around 1740. This is played on a replica of an early 18th century fortepiano by David Sutherland. And it was a concert of the Ravensong Early Keyboard Series in Philadelphia, which took place just this past May. So my sincere thanks to Leon Schellhase, the director of that series, for permission to share this excerpt. Two things to listen for. In the first movement, listen for the effective use of the Alberti bass figure in the accompaniment, for which he is more famous in a way than anything else, although he was certainly a creative composer who went beyond that. And in the second movement, listen for a sequence that just won't quit. So with that, let's listen to the first excerpt. The piano we've been listening to, as I mentioned, was made by David Sutherland of Ann Arbor, Michigan. In 2005, David, to me, is the leading expert in this country on the Italian School of Keyboard Instrument building, and he has done deep research into that school and has vast experience building in that tradition, both harpsichords and more recently fortepianos. This particular instrument I've been playing since it was new in 2005, and I had the good luck to be able to acquire it in 2009 and have played it frequently ever since. To give you a closer look at the piano and perhaps a basic understanding of how it works, I prepared a little video, which we'll turn to now, and after that I'll rejoin you with a few slides to talk more about Cristofori and his tradition in piano making. So if we might play the video, please. We're in the harpsichord room at UNC Greensboro School of Music, and I'd like to show you a brief tour of the Florentine piano by David Sutherland. We'll start with the features that can be observed from the exterior. Here we're looking at the tail of the instrument, and as you hopefully can see, the entire compass of the instrument is strung bichord in brass. The lowest 6 notes are on split bridges, and the rest is on a single bridge. This view is looking down the row of dampers with the damper cover removed, and you can also see 3 gap spacers that connect the soundboard to the pin block. Here we see a single damper, elegantly designed with one strip of leather that's threaded through the stick so that you have contact points on the left and the right, and therefore it can sit in between the bichord stringing for a single note. Looking down the row of pins, you'll notice that no strings are visible. That's because Cristofori designed them to travel underneath the pin block. We'll have a quick look at that in just a moment. Looking at the keyboard, we see beautiful boxwood naturals, and I can show you the mechanism to slide the keyboard to the left just enough to miss one string to get the una corda effect back to normal position. With the action removed, we can see underneath the pin block the way in which the strings are brought over a nut and passed to the front, where they are attached and wound around the pins. The action is in 2 sections. It has a hammer frame which rests on top of the key frame. I will now separate the two and we'll look at them individually. In this side view of the key frame, you can see the jack, which moves upwards with the movement of the hammer. As you can see, it's sprung with a brass spring beneath the key to return to its original position. You have the red felt pad, which is the let-off adjustment, and you have the back check. This side view of the hammer stack shows the hammerheads themselves, which, according to Cristofori's plan, are made of glued cylinders of parchment with a layer of leather added to soften the striking point. This makes for a very light hammerhead. We also see, very importantly, the intermediate lever, which directly transfers the energy of the jack when it moves up. And right where the point, if I can get it, you see this sort of angled place at the bottom of this. The point of that is the escapement point, where the upward motion of the jack escapes from the intermediate lever. And as that lever rises, the motion is transferred right here to the shank of the hammer, which then flips up and moves towards the key. This whole arrangement is a very strongly accelerating action that has a mechanical advantage of about 10 to 1. With parts reassembled, we see the effect of all this engineering, which is a very effective hammer action. So that's the short description of how the piano works. But what a genius Cristofori was to be able to invent this from scratch, basically. And to appreciate this a little further, I have some slides that we will now look at. So the title asks a tendentious question, but it's easily answered. Cristofori matters because without him, the development of the piano would have taken a very different direction, if indeed it happened at all. His hammer action is the single most important ancestor of all subsequent piano designs. Next slide, please. Here's a portrait of Cristofori of unknown date, which may or may not have been taken from life. The subject is standing next to a keyboard instrument. As you can see, a piece of keyboard in the lower right corner. And just above that, there is a red arrow, small red arrow. We know this is Cristofori because what the red arrow points to is going to give it away. Next slide, please. Okay, so a close-up shows that his hand is resting on a drawing, which turns out to be, has been analyzed and discovered to be the scheme of the design of his piano action. And the still greater enlargement on the right shows that his pinky finger is pointing to his name, C-R-I-S. So there's no question that is who we are supposedly looking at. Next slide, please. Only 3 original Cristofori pianos still exist in the world, sadly, but we'll see photos of each of them. This is the one in the United States at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's not very playable. It can be played after a fashion, but after a brutal attempt at restoration in the early 20th century, it cannot be tuned up beyond a very, very low pitch. Next slide, please. This is the next in line, 1722 in Rome, and this view makes it very plain to see that Cristofori's compass for all 3 instruments was 4 octaves, a low C to a high C. So not very large, but sufficient for a lot of music of the time. Next slide, please. And the third piano is in Leipzig, Germany. And the beautiful chinoiserie case is not from Cristofori. It's just that like the Italian harpsichords, Cristofori's pianos were intended to be held inside a separate case, and that's true in this case. Next slide, please. This is the instrument that we just looked at, David Sutherland's instrument. It's identical in action with Cristofori's pianos, except for the extension of its range to 4.5 octaves, low G to high D. Next slide. So a little reception history. Some have speculated that Cristofori's invention was slow to catch on because it was somehow flawed or disliked. But this early review in a cultural journal, 1711, dispels that notion. I'll read because it's important to get close to the source. It is known to whomever loves music that one of the principal sources from which the skillful in this art draw the secret of singularly delighting those who listen is the piano and the fortezzo. Now, of this diversity and alteration of voice, the harpsichord is entirely deprived. But Cristofori has already made 3 harpsichords with piano and forte, and they have all succeeded perfectly. Next slide. Maffei continues, some professors have not given to this invention all the applause that it merits. First, because they have not understood how much ingenuity was required to overcome the difficulty. Secondly, it has appeared to them that the voice of the instrument, being different from the ordinary, is too soft and dull, given that we are accustomed to the silvery sound of other harpsichords. But the ear quickly adapts itself to it and becomes so charmed that one never tires of it, and the common harpsichords no longer please. And we must add that it sounds even more sweet at some distance. Next slide. But truly, the major opposition that has been raised against this new instrument is the general lack of knowledge at first of how to play it. Because being a new instrument, it requires a person who has made a particular study of it, so as to regulate the strength of the varied pressure which should be given to the keys, and the graceful diminishing at the right time and place, and to choose pieces suited to it, and delicate ones, and especially separating and making the parts progress, and to make heard the subjects in various places. Next slide. So this is a drawing of one of Cristofori's piano actions, the Leipzig Piano. It's exactly identical with what we've seen in David Sutherland's piano in almost every detail. Next slide, please. When we compare it top to bottom with the same view of a modern piano action, it becomes clear that Cristofori's concept was perfectly designed from the beginning, because every element that we looked at in Cristofori's action, the jack, the intermediate lever, the hammer shank, and of course the hammer itself, has its counterpart in the modern action, which is basically a refinement and enlargement of Cristofori's original action. Next slide, please. Now, despite the evidence of the early recognition by Maffei, and I'm sure others, of the brilliance of Cristofori's invention, some have resisted accepting it as influential in its time. Michael Cole is an eminent researcher and expert on early pianos who has written, "It would hardly be overstating the case to say that before the advent of the early classical era, even as late as 1765, the pianoforte had barely any influence on musical composition or performance. With a few exceptions, keyboard players remained unconvinced and unconverted." Next slide. John Koster, an equally eminent researcher and expert on early pianos, takes the opposing view. Arguably, no new invention in the history of music has had a greater or more lasting influence. Within a few decades of its appearance, Cristofori's invention, the piano, was known and imitated throughout most of Europe. Next slide. Denzel Wright, who is, like David Sutherland, a builder of such pianos and an admirer, a deep admirer of Florentine pianos, sees a place for these instruments in our modern musical world. The instrument, with its dependable and fully developed action, which was then the prerogative of the noble and wealthy, is now becoming better known to a wider audience. Last slide, please. So, like Denzel Wright, I believe the Florentine piano holds an important place among the myriad historical pianos that have captured our interest in recent times. 1,000 thanks, Mr. Cristofori. Okay, so now that we've had a look at how the Florentine tradition emerged and how the instrument works, let's have another listen to the piano itself. This performance of the Sarabande from J.S. Bach's Partita in B-flat major was recorded in 2015 by recording engineer Christopher Greenleaf in a church which had a very live acoustic. You will hear the use of the una corda effect in the repeat of each section. So let's have a listen to the recording. Now, the Florentine fortepiano, which is a term that I use because this particular instrument is not a direct replica of any existing instrument. As we noted, there are only 3 surviving from Cristofori himself, and only 1 instrument with a piano action by his successor in the same shop, Ferrini, which is somewhat later than the time that we think this piano would have been made, around the mid-1730s. But Florence, of course, is where Cristofori worked, and therefore Florentine fortepiano is a term that sort of is accurate without being too specific. And this kind of instrument can excel in ensemble settings as well. Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, in his treatise, specified its use to produce accompaniments, quote, of the most refined taste, unquote. Who could disagree? It also works well as a solo instrument, as you may have heard during the opening music right before the live salon began. And in combination with other kinds of keyboard instruments, its contrasting timbre and dynamic nuance, when played with harpsichords in the same group, can enhance polyphonic clarity. I discovered this vividly when preparing the Bach Concerto for 3 keyboards with 2 of my wonderfully talented and intelligent students, Robin Morace and Stephanie Schmidt, whom you will hear from each of them again later in the hour. This performance took place in the beautiful organ hall at our school, the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. So let's hear this video, please.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you so much, Andrew, for that rousing performance and for lending so much insight and helping us appreciate the genius of Cristofori's invention. Next, it's my great pleasure to introduce Nathan Mondry, who is in Montreal. Nathan, welcome to the salon. Nathan has studied at in Basel and in McGill University, and is an internationally recognized fortepianist, organist, and harpsichordist, and is also a wonderful composer and improviser. Tonight, we'll be hearing him play one of his own compositions on a Silbermann fortepiano. So after Nathan's performance, he and Andrew will come back on and talk about the relationship between Gottfried Silbermann and Cristofori. But Nathan, please tell us about the piece, how you composed it, a little bit about the piano you'll be playing, and a little bit about yourself. Welcome.
Thank you for the introduction, Yi-heng. I'll try my best to conform to what you asked. So the first selection you're going to hear is an improvisation utilizing the una corda and the damper releasing hand stops. In a similar fashion to pianos of Cristofori and Farini, one manually shifts the keyboard on Gottfried Silbermann instruments for the una corda. The origin of the damper release likely comes from the pantalon, an undamped hammered dulcimer that was popular in the early 18th century. Silbermann made some of these instruments before he had a falling out with the instrument's inventor, Pantaleon Hebenstreit, who obtained a royal writ preventing Gottfried from making any more. So it's possible that this was a way to circumvent him not being able to make those instruments by including them in his pianos. The second selection is the first movement of a keyboard sonata of mine. It's entitled La Bonne Nouvelle, or The Good News, and it features the harpsichord hand stops of this piano. I hope that that's an adequate enough introduction.
Wonderful, Nathan. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Nathan, for sharing that. It was really great to hear it. I was struck by your demonstration of the stops on the Silbermann, because I don't have anything of the kind other than una corda as a alternate sound on my instrument, and I was wondering, what use you would make of them. Do you prefer the sound with the so-called harpsichord stop added, or was that just a choice for this piece?
Yeah, I don't know if I normally prefer it. I think it generally works best with like loud, fast pieces. I find the natural sound of at least how Yves Beaupré, the builder of this instrument, how he made the hammers for this. I think the natural sound of it is beautiful, and una corda too is really beautiful, and it sounds so strikingly similar to the Cristofori una corda.
Well, indeed, it is beautiful, as we heard in your improvisation. I'm wondering, with all of the various types of instrument that one can now commission, what was it that led you to choose this type?
Well, it's funny you mentioned David Sutherland, because I was interested in a Florentine piano, and he attempted to make one, but alas, it fell through. And meanwhile, here in Montreal, Yves Beaupré had been building the Silbermann. I'd seen it in the workshop a number of times, played it out, was like, as it was being built, I got to, help, improve the action in my own ways by playing it. And I grew to really love the instrument. It's very similar to the 1749 model with a couple modifications. The 1749 is almost the full 5 octaves from F to high E, with the ability to play in both 415 and 392. And I have the additional note on top so that I have a full 5 octaves.
Oh, you are so lucky.
I am. Well, and if I were to show you inside, it's really scrunched in there. It barely fits.
It's well, I just had my first encounter with a Silbermann replica that's at Cornell that was commissioned by Malcolm Bilson from Paul McNulty. And it follows the original design of high E being the top of the range. But what I was really drawn to try to play on it was the music of C.P.E. Bach, which has such dramatic contrasts of dynamics and affect all the time. And that piano seemed to respond to it well. But it's amazing how many pieces by C.P.E. Bach use that high F. It was very frustrating.
I have a hunch that he must have had one of Silbermann's later pianos, because he's writing in the 1760s in the Versuch, he talks about the undamped register of the piano. And I assume as a hand stop, which must mean he had like one of his later pianos, I think.
Well, the open damper effect is really very mesmerizing, and I thought you handled it beautifully. So I wonder I'm sure we could go on talking for hours really about this, but there's much more ahead. So perhaps we should move forward with the program and continue the conversation afterwards when we can bring others into the discussion. But thank you again for playing that and sharing that great music with us. It was great to hear it.
Thank you.
Okay, now, as promised, Stephanie Schmidt will return to play for us on... Okay, so I have to set this up a little bit, because we are now going to move away from Cristofori and his tradition. And I wanted to take the opportunity, while I had this great chance to be the guest host, to share with you some of the other kinds of historical instruments that I've been fortunate enough to make part of my life. And so we are going to do a little sampling of 4 additional instruments. And just to give you the layout, which is also in the program, we'll start with a 1787 Broadwood square. Then we go to a Walter replica. There's a photo of the square, indeed. And we can leave that up for a few minutes. And following that, we'll move into the 19th century, and we will hear a Pleyel, and a Bösendorfer grand piano. So more on each of those as they come up. This piano is Broadwood Square Piano 600, built in 1787. It was formerly in the possession of musicologist A. Peter Brown of Indiana University. It's 5-octave range, F to F, has no pedals or stops of any kind. So a modest instrument at the time, because it was shortly after that a square piano would be expected to have hand stops to raise the dampers, but we have none here. And it was, the square piano caught on incredibly in England after it was introduced in the 1760s, became a necessity in every musical home, and it was the predominant type of keyboard instrument available for many decades. So Stephanie Schmidt is going to play for us on it, and she might be willing to share some of her thoughts about the instrument and its music. Stephanie?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. To reiterate what Dr. Willis mentioned, the square piano was
Andrew,
a very,
please.
very talking with your teacher. It was the household instrument at the turn of the 19th century because of its size and because of its tone. It made the perfect instrument for the drawing room, or really almost any room in the average household. And while people were playing on these instruments in the sense of, being soloists, they were even more important as accompaniment to dancing and singing. And it's to reflect this aspect of their usage that I chose the selections that I will shortly share with you. A dance followed by a set of variations on a popular Scottish folk song. And while neither of these pieces are really in the same category of music as the Bach that you already heard, or the Chopin or C.P.E. that you are about to hear, they perfectly suit the nature of this instrument, and I think the two reflect very well on each other. So I would like to give it away to the Broadwood Square at this time.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. We're going to move on to the Walter piano, which is the first forte piano that came into my life. Going back to the 1980s, I had the opportunity to take summer courses with Malcolm Bilson in the early 1980s. And after the second experience like that, I realized I simply had to acquire a forte piano of my own. The instrument we'll hear next was built by Vincent C. Doolin in Philadelphia in 1986 and represents the Viennese classical school, following closely the work of Anton Walter. It has a range of 5.5 octaves, low F to high C, with a split knee lever for lifting the dampers and a hand-pulled moderator stop. Another of my wonderful students, who I have to brag, has just submitted her dissertation to the graduate school this very week. Mengfei Xu will play for us a rondo by Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, and will share some thoughts about her experience with the forte piano. Mengfei?
Hello everyone tonight. So I would like to share some music with you on the Walter piano by Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, the great 18th century composer, also inspired Mozart very much. So this piece I chose was written in 1785. The work number 59 is one of the 6 collections of, for the German word, Können und Liebhaber. During this time, C.P.E. was influenced by Haydn, who was one of the leading figures, written symphonic music in the style of Strum and Duan. Dr. Willis, please correct me if I don't pronounce the German word correctly. While I was learning this piece, I was so attracted and amazed by the characters and the surprises, also the sense of humor C.P.E. Bach puts in his music. Well, in the performance practice at this time, Johann Quantz recommended to apply the use of striking dissonances to bring out the excitement of alternating passions. Surely C.P.E. Bach constantly alternates the passions in this rondo, includes very dissonant key modulations, dynamic changes, and rests in many unexpected places. When we were doing this project, Dr. Willis reminded me that the Walter piano has a few more keys compared to C.P.E. Bach's piano, which means C.P.E. was using some extreme pitches on both ends of his keyboard in this piece. I didn't notice because my hands were not on the edge of the Walter until Dr. Willis pointed out. I believe some specific pitches also represent emotion and expression. Today, many piano students who mostly working on a modern instrument like me would easily overlook this fact when we practice the music written in the 18th century. I hope you will enjoy this piece. Thank you.
Thanks, Mengfei. Thank you very much, Mengfei. That's one of my favorite endings, I have to say. Moving on, because we have two more pianos ahead. In 2003, a research leave gave me the opportunity to get acquainted with the 19th century French piano tradition exemplified by Évrard and Pleyel. Both makers were admired by Chopin, who famously explained, quoting Chopin, "When I am somewhat indisposed, I play an Évrard piano and I easily find a sound ready to hand. But when I am in form and feel strong enough to find my own sound, I must have a Pleyel." So Chopin had a very personal fondness for Pleyel and also a personal friendship with the owner of the firm, Camille Pleyel. When I met the well-known Dutch piano restorer and collector Edwin Bunk on my journey, he informed me that a Pleyel grand piano in excellent condition, built during Chopin's lifetime, might be available to acquire. And fortunately, this was true, and Pleyel number 15,270, built in 1848, currently resides in my home studio. I've found it to be a sonically beautiful piano and an illuminating source of insight into Chopin's aesthetics and technical approach to the piano. Of course, any music of the period can be played to advantage on this piano, but Chopin still seems to me to be its best or his most perfect match. My student Robin Morace, who will join us now, has spent considerable time investigating what this piano has to offer, and he's returning now to play the Impromptu in A flat major, opus 29 by Chopin, and to share his thoughts on the piece and the piano. Robin?
Wonderful, thank you. So before we listen to my recording of the Impromptu, I just wanted to share some thoughts about what I found to be the most interesting and illuminating part of playing this piece on a mid-19th century Pleyel, which was engaging with Chopin's highly detailed pedal markings. Throughout the entire Impromptu, he creates a kind of dialogue between the pedaled and unpedaled sound of the instrument. And both sounds are somewhat different to the corresponding sounds on the modern piano. The unpedaled sound is not quite so dry as we're used to on the modern instrument. And the pedaled sound is really much clearer. And Chopin makes extensive use of the possibilities that this affords him. In the first two bars of the piece, he initiates his dialogue between these sounds in a very simple way. The pedal is depressed on the strong beats and released on the weak beats. So we have a kind of very regular undulation between these sounds. But as the narrative of the piece unfolds, Chopin makes use of this alternation in increasingly complex ways, leading in some places to more and longer pedals, and in other places to longer stretches with little to no pedal at all. And for me, it seemed to be a mark of Chopin's subtle mastery of both the instrument and the art of composition in general, that this varied and highly nuanced use of the pedal really isn't particularly noticeable in and of itself as you listen to the piece. It just beautifully complements and enhances the musical argument. So at some points, it just kind of underscores the meter. Other places amplifies the harmony, or maybe just imbues a certain passage with a very particular character. So with that said, why don't we just have a listen to the piece?
Thank you so much, Robin, for that evocative performance. It's a pleasure listening to someone else play the Pleyel for a change. This brings us to our last piano of the evening, which is a Bösendorfer Grand built in Vienna in 1841. Here's a photograph of this piano. I'd like to share, this is, by the way, well, I'll get to that. I'd like to share with you the opening of the restoration report made by the master restorer, Edward Swenson, who will tell us about his experience. So this is quoting Ed Swenson. In 1987, I found an early Bösendorfer fortepiano in a storeroom at the Austrian Benedictine monastery at Kremsmünster. The piano, which was clearly destined for disposal, was resting on its bent side next to a broken window where it was subjected to the ravages of wind, rain, and sun. Please show the second photo. The fallboard and key slip were lying on the floor. This is right side up, folks. Were lying on the floor, dirty and delaminated. The piano was so covered with filth that the maker's name was illegible. Although the original strings were rusty and broken, the piano was still intact and retained its original hammers and dampers. Fortunately, I was able to save this instrument from further deterioration. It arrived at my workshop in Trumansburg, New York in July 1987. Restoration of the instrument took 2 years. Resuming my story, after it was restored, the Bösendorfer was acquired by Cornell University, was one of the instruments available to graduate students in the Historical Performance DMA program, where I played it often between 1990 and 1994. Shortly after I moved to Greensboro, I learned that the Bösendorfer would be sold and the proceeds invested to commission a new Graf replica. So I jumped at the chance and was lucky enough to make it the first of my 3 historically original pianos. Offering 6.5 octaves from C to G with damper, actually A, that was a mistake, with damper and shift pedals. Its sweetness and warmth of tone is great for repertoire ranging from Beethoven through the early Romantics. Last fall, Greensboro's treasured chamber music series, Music for a Great Space, offered me the opportunity to record a recital for the series in my home using this piano. For this, I'm very grateful to founder Lucy Ingram and executive director Rebecca Willey, whom I also thank for permission to share an excerpt from that recital tonight. The work, a pair of romances by Clara Schumann, seems made with the Bösendorfer in mind. The composer's expressive harmonic and polyphonic mastery evokes endless coloristic nuance, which the sweet tone of this piano amply provides. And before we hear it, I'd like to close by thanking everyone who's generously helped to make this evening possible. Players, organizers, and listeners. I hope we've been able to suggest the limitless range of musical possibilities opened up by the originator of the whole thing, Bartolomeo Cristofori, who himself could hardly have imagined the earth-shaking consequence of his clever invention. We're enormously lucky that in learning to play one instrument, the piano, we gain access to multiple instruments and musical worlds. So with that, let's listen to Clara Schumann.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Andrew Willis, for that scintillating performance on your 1841 Bösendorfer piano of Clara Schumann romances. Bravo. Bravo to all of our performers tonight, Nathan Mondry, Mengfei Xu, Robin Morace, and Stephanie Schmidt.
Stephanie.
Who hopefully will rejoin us in a moment. This was such a wonderful and illuminating program. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to our audience. My name is Yi-heng and my co-host Maria Rose. We are the directors of the Academy of Fortepiano Performance. If you want to see more salons like this in the future, please consider donating to the Catskill Mountain Foundation. It's a nonprofit organization which sponsors the salons like you've seen tonight. So now we have a time of Q&A. So to all of you who are watching on YouTube and Facebook, this is your opportunity to ask questions of all of our performers tonight. You can simply type your questions in the chat boxes and we will see them and be able to answer your questions, we hope. So please go ahead and do that. Let's see. But while we're waiting for your questions to come in, Stephanie Schmidt, you told me as we were listening to Robin Morace play so beautifully that Chopin impromptu on Andrew's Pleyel Grand, that I should ask Andrew Willis what he did to the hammers of that. So I'm intrigued as to your treatment to make that piano sound so beautiful.
Well, thank you, first of all, for thinking that it is beautiful. But I didn't do anything to it. It was entirely the work of an expert technician and specialist whose name is Jay Gamble. But we had help in consulting from several important people in the field. In particular, John Watson, who was for many years the chief curator of musical instruments at Colonial Williamsburg, now retired, and who helped us with the selection of material that we used. What we did, I always felt that the felt hammer covering, which was presumably original, was too precious to voice with the usual method of voicing felt, which is to stick it with needles and use sandpaper to smooth it out. I mean, I did not want to lose any more of that material and furthermore, it never quite convinced me that piano sounded the way Pleyels were described as sounding, which is they always referred to the fact that they were more intimate, perhaps is a way of putting it, than the Erard piano. And that piano had a very aggressive sound with its original hammers. So we devised the approach to add an outer layer of leather to the hammers, which was certainly, you can find examples from the period of hammers that are designed in that way. So we have the wood core, a little bit of leather at the very center, then the main covering, which is felt, and then a outer layer of leather. And for what it's worth, that leather turned to what we tried quite a few different samples of leather that were from a specialist in tanning according to old methods. And the one which we ended up using was from orange hair sheep. So I've never seen an orange sheep, nor have I seen a sheep with hair, but that's what it's called. So that's what we have. It creates a softer surface. I'll also add that there was a little bit of additional material placed underneath the leather at the striking point so that it could restore the roundedness of the hammer surface.
Yeah, it struck me from when I heard the instrument, because I remember hearing it, I think, when you just got it in a concert, and it did not have that warm, woolly sound from what I remember, and I remember that you were still not completely happy with the. But this sounded really spectacularly beautiful. But
correct me.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, Robin, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it also easier to play?
Yeah, it was a bit tough to play before because you would so quickly get to a very hard sound that a lot of the big range of sounds that the piano has on offer didn't seem quite so attractive. But now basically all of the various tones that you can get are things that you want, so it feels a little safer and friendlier to play on than it used to.
And I would add that, it's was able to preserve what I think was one of the most important qualities of the piano, which is its colorfulness, that you don't just simply get a sound that can either be soft or loud, but you get a sound that varies according to the intensity of the dynamics. And this, I think, was very important. So I was thrilled to be able to capture that.
At the same time, I'm reminded of that letter from, I think it was Jean-Baptiste to Sébastien Erard, who when he was in England and they were talking about their pianos in England, and they remarked how the English liked a much more woolly sound than the instruments in France, than their French customers. So some of that brightness is I think was slightly more acceptable in France at the time than in places like England.
And I will say that I always thought that the piano was essentially very beautiful in sound, but as Robin points out, it was a little tricky to handle because it so quickly would get to a point where you had to have supreme control to get the exact shades of dynamic that you were looking for. So currently it's a little bit more, how to put it, normal way of playing the piano without losing the expressiveness, in my opinion.
I would love to go back a little bit to the beginning, the large portion that we spend on the early pianos, as much as we all love the Pleyel. And one question that came to me was when you talked about the maximalist and the minimalist view of the impact of the Cristofori. And it's kind of my view that the piano, by us, we look at it as a completely different world, like a revolutionary change to go from an harpsichord to piano. I don't think that many people experienced it as such at that time. I really think that the piano, or what they called a harpsichord with loud and soft, was much more like a regular harpsichord with some extra features which allowed you to play loud and soft, but it was not the complete revolutionary change that we would expect them to experience. So I think it's somewhere in the middle between the maximalist and the minimalist view. So that when they say, well, it didn't really have any impact until much later, well, I think they were not as shocked as we expected them to be by the piano.
Well, I'm sure that might be the case. What I've learned quite a bit by talking to David Sutherland, who's really sort of passionately committed to the maximalist view. And he points out that in sonatas, Italian sonatas of the period, such as the Alberti, you have many figures. We see it also in Marcello and Platti and other fine composers whom we associate with the harpsichord primarily, and yet they're using figures like the Alberti bass, where you have 4 times as many notes in the loudest register of the piano to accompany than you do in the melodic voice, which seems just wrong-headed somehow. Why would such a pattern have developed if it weren't possible to gauge the loudness of the touch? We can't prove anything, of course, and it's all inferential, but there's a lot of suggestions, even in Bach, I think, that the playing was becoming more nuanced. And of course, the clavichord was certainly in the picture at all times, but simply not available as a performance instrument.
Yeah, not as much in a country like France. They basically had no clavichord, so they kind of came from the harpsichord and the pantalon, and they were extremely popular, and but no clavichords really.
I don't really know much about the development of the piano in France. I've seen, I believe, reference to a later member of the Silbermann family working in Strasbourg.
Yeah. And Jean-Henri, he actually traveled with, I think Stein worked in his shop for a while in Strasbourg. And when he was traveling, and he came with Johann Eckert to Paris, probably with a piano that Stein had built in the Strasbourg Silbermann shop, and that was like a first exposure of the. So that was the first published set of sonatas by Johann Eckert in, I think, 1761 in Paris, where he mentions the piano. So they were far between, but yeah, the Strasbourg, and then also out of Strasbourg came Edelman and Hillman, all the French composers who really promoted the piano in the 1770s in Paris.
Yes, well, it's certainly important to realize that at the early stages, these pianos were very rare, and there's a suggestion from the marking of Roman numeral 20 on one of Cristofori's surviving pianos that he made at least 20 pianos. But we only have a few surviving, and in the world, 20 instruments of any given type, even with the population of Europe as it was, is hardly going to make a widespread impact.
Right.
But where it did make an impact was with cognoscenti. People like Handel, Scarlatti, the Castrato, Farinelli had a Cristofori piano which he loved and even named it Raffaello. So there was at the top of the musical world there was interest, but it certainly was not widespread.
No, I'm sure it was quite expensive too.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, but nevertheless, in the more high elite houses, I think they're like Madame Brion, for example. I mean, she did get a piano. I mean, it was a thing they talked about. It was definitely a thing, but whether many people actually played it was something else. But and the other thing is, I mean, I thought the Silbermann piano sounded really wonderful and not all that different from the Cristofori piano. So it's amazing how they really are related. And I don't know for the audience. I'm sure all of you know this, but Johann Sebastian Bach was extremely familiar with all the Gottfried Silbermann pianos that were built still during his lifetime. He was even involved in selling them. He was a sales agent for Silbermann, trying to sell them to clients. So he definitely was quite familiar with them.
He was indeed, and I think it depends how far you want to carry the speculations, but the fact that the 1730s was the era in which we see Bach compose 7 keyboard concertos for solo harpsichord, which he had never done before and which nobody really had done before. I mean, there's hundreds of Baroque violin concertos, but you can look for days before you find anything for a solo harpsichord in that context. One of the problems with the harpsichord as a solo instrument is that it blends into the orchestral sound so well.
Right.
And so when Bach did use it in that one example of the Fifth Brandenburg, he makes it register as a solo instrument by having everybody else shut up so that the harpsichord can play by itself. But it's not the case when it comes to the 7 concertos of the 1730s. So it's a possibility that he was already thinking in terms of a more nuanced instrument that could attract attention by its expressiveness rather than its power.
Yeah, I was curious with all of you when you were playing. You know, many of us grew up playing Bach on a modern piano, and you know, and with them we know that it's more correct to play it on the harpsichord. Did you feel like it's like coming back home to play on this kind of piano, or was it a whole different thing? How did you all experience playing Bach on the Florentine piano?
Well, it's a wonderful question. I think that the thing that surprised me about it was how easy it was to do. I mean, it just really, it's not a different nature of experience from playing on a modern piano. It's just a much, less energy intensive, if I could put it that way, where you have a much lighter action, a real strong response to the strength that you put into the keys. And so, but there's no question when you feel this action that it's a familiar touch, which is not necessarily true of the Viennese action, which is so hair trigger and so light.
Sure.
But you also don't have to work for the kind of clarity of texture the way you do on the modern piano.
Right, yeah. Right. Yeah, and you don't have to worry about going overboard either in terms of the sound that you're making. Like, oh no, I can't do that because this is a modern piano. I mean, it keeps you within the right sound for
Another interesting fact was it has a very nice singing sustain, but much shorter and more focused on the attack than we get with a modern piano. And so tempi tend to want to be fairly, at least slow tempi tend to want to be a little bit faster, because if you dawdle around, you lose the sound.
Right. Yi-heng, did you?
Yeah, we have a couple of great questions from our audience. So Nathan Carol Breckenridge asked to talk about the maker of your Silbermann piano. Can you just tell us briefly about who that is again?
Yeah, Yves Beaupré. He's been a harpsichord builder most of his professional life. This Silbermann is the first piano he ever made. So in that sense, it's very special. And I think from his perspective, probably similar to someone like David Sutherland and other harpsichord builders who go into then building fortepianos, it kind of mirrors the historical precedent of how those builders started as harpsichord makers, and then along the way they got a second renewal or something to try and go in this direction.
Great. And we have another question from Natalie Katzadeh. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. But she has a question for Stephanie Schmidt. She says, how does one make dynamic contrasts on a square piano differently in comparison to a forte piano?
I think it's really just a matter of scale and of what you can expect from different instruments. So I think with the square piano in particular, as with all the other instruments we've heard tonight, you have to let the piano tell you whether the repertoire is appropriate for the instrument. And even in a later square piano, one with pedal, where you would have a few more options of what you could play, the most virtuosic music just might not be the right choice for that instrument. Does anyone else?
I just, I have probably, of all my instruments, that would be the one with which I'm least familiar, but it's there are times, I don't know what accounts for this exactly, but there are times when I'm able to sit down at the piano and play and it feels perfectly comfortable. And there are other times when I sit down to it and I feel like, you know, the proverbial bull in the china shop. I can't get in the light enough touch and I'm not getting good sound and I don't know what's wrong. So somehow though, Stephanie, when you play it, you always get a very expressive sound.
I think what changed for me from when I first tried this piano and I found it much more difficult to have a rapport with is I felt like I needed to be delicate with it. And even though you'd think that a smaller instrument, you know, where you don't have as much key depth, that you would want to be more delicate, sometimes that approach can be counterintuitive.
Yeah, well, I agree that delicate is the right direction because you can't push the sound of that instrument too hard.
No.
But it's very live, you know. I mean, I'm always struck by the fact this thing is, what, 250 years old or almost, and it's just still full of life.
Maybe the other thing that happens with an instrument like that is listening to it, your ear sort of scales down to it, so you're not expecting the same vast range of dynamics that you could get on a larger or more modern instrument. It's more like listening to a clavichord.
I think that's right. And there's another factor that I think is worth mentioning. There's a flap on the right, to the right of the keyboard, which we had open when you played, and so the sound would come out into the room. But it's perfectly possible to play it with that little lid. It's not very large, maybe you know, a 1 square foot worth of area. But when that's closed, the instrument is softer, but you can sort of lay into it a little bit less gingerly. So, you know, who knows how they preferred it. We probably could expect that they would have often played it when it was closed.
Always, I imagine.
Yeah.
Well, this is a great discussion on square pianos. Thank you so much again. I think in the interest of time, we'll stop here and welcome you to join us in a Zoom reception, especially this is our last salon of the summer. We will continue next season in September, so stay tuned. Thank you again to Andrew Willis, Nathan Mondry, Robin Morace, Stephanie Schmidt, and Mengfei Xu for this really wonderful program tonight. So in your chat boxes, if you wish to join us and have more one-on-one conversations with the artists tonight and meet each other, please click on the Zoom link and we will see you there shortly. But if not, thank you for joining us tonight and have a great summer.